The old courthouse in Madison County had seen its fair share of broken families, bitter arguments, and painful truths. But on that late Thursday morning, the air felt unusually charged. Something about the room seemed to hum, as if the walls themselves sensed that whatever was about to unfold would leave a mark deeper than most cases that passed through. The courtroom was packed tighter than usual for a custody hearing. Wooden benches groaned with the weight of tense bodies, relatives, social workers, attorneys, and spectators who had nowhere else to be but everywhere to judge. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, adding a subtle irritation to the already frayed nerves inside the chamber. At the front, behind the polished mahogany bench, sat Judge Samuel Harlan, a man who'd carved his reputation on patience and fairness. Today, though, even he strained to keep composure. His fingers tapped lightly on the arm of his chair as he watched the lawyers deliberately circle around each other like cautious wolves. Across from each other sat Mark Reynolds and Elise Harper, once high school sweethearts, now broken adults held together by a single thread, their daughter, Ava. Mark sat rigid, elbows tight to his torso, as if fearing that any movement might reveal something he was trying desperately to keep hidden. He wore a neatly pressed flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up like he'd just come from honest work, but his eyes betrayed him, darting, sharp, tense. Every few seconds, his foot tapped the floor hard enough that the bench beneath him vibrated. Elise sat with her shoulders rounded inward, hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles had turned white. Her hair was disheveled, tucked behind one ear but escaping at the ends. She avoided Mark's eyes entirely, staring ahead as though focusing on breathing alone. Her lawyer whispered instructions to her from the side, but Elise only nodded distantly, lost in something deeper and darker than the present moment. Between them sat Ava Reynolds, the smallest soul in the room, kicking her tiny heels gently against the wooden bench. She was 3 years old, all soft curls, wide brown eyes, and a mismatched outfit that hinted Elise had dressed her in a hurry that morning. Ava played with the frayed edge of a plush bunny that hadn't left her grasp since the hearing began. She seemed unaware of the adults, storm swirling around her, or maybe she understood more than anyone realized. A deputy stood near the front, hand resting casually on the leash of his K9 partner. The dog, a large German shepherd named Ranger, lay at his feet, head resting between enormous, loyal paws. His presence was routine. Ranger accompanied the deputy on courthouse duty twice a week. He was trained to detect threats, drugs, and emotional escalation. And on this day, his ears twitched frequently. Judge Harlan cleared his throat and lifted a hand. "Let's maintain order," he said, his voice firm but low. "We still need to hear closing statements." The lawyers returned to their spots, flipping through their notes. Papers rustled. A cough echoed. Someone's chair squeaked as they shifted weight. The tension was so thick it felt like a blanket draped over everyone's shoulders. Elise's attorney rose slowly. "Your Honor, it is our position." Before she could finish, Ava's little voice cut through the courtroom like a sharp blade slicing through fabric. "Doggy," she said. It was barely more than a whisper, but every head turned. Ava pointed a tiny finger at the police K9 at the front of the room. Her eyes lit with recognition, something warm and familiar sparking behind them, something that didn't make sense to anyone else in the room. The deputy blinked twice, looking down at Ranger. Ranger unexpectedly raised his head. Judge Harlan adjusted his glasses, confused by the interruption. "Young lady," he said gently, "please stay with your mother." But Ava didn't sit down. Instead, she slowly stood up on the bench, balancing on her small shoes, her bunny dangling from her hand. Her voice rang out again, slightly louder. "Doggy, you saw it." The room fell into stunned silence. Every whisper ceased. Even the buzzing lights seemed to quiet. Mark's head jerked toward her. Elise froze mid-breath. The attorneys stared at each other, unsure if they heard her correctly. "You saw it." "Saw what?" The judge leaned forward. "Excuse me," he asked, his tone shifting from gentle to sharply attentive. But Ava didn't look at him. She was staring straight at Ranger. The K9 stood up abruptly, unsettlingly, and walked toward her. Gasps filled the gallery. The deputy tugged at the leash. "Ranger, hey, sit." But the dog ignored every command. He walked straight to Ava as if drawn by something invisible, stopping right in front of the little girl, his tail low, ears forward, head tilted in recognition. Not curiosity. Recognition. Elise's hand shot out as if to shield her daughter, but she stopped when Ranger gently nudged Ava's hand with his nose. Ava giggled, a soft, innocent sound far too pure for the tension in the room. Judge Harlan's voice dropped to a deeper register. "Mr. Reynolds, does your daughter know this dog?" Mark hesitated too long. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, eyes flickering toward the exit. When he finally answered, his voice was thin. "No, she's never seen that dog. I don't know what she's talking about." But his hesitation was already an answer. The judge noticed. So did Elise. Ava crouched down on the bench, leaning closer to Ranger's face. The dog lifted his head proudly and locked eyes with her. Then, in a move that sent chills down everyone's spine, Ava leaned in and whispered into the dog's ear. Her lips moved slowly, intentionally, as though confiding a secret she'd held for far too long. The courtroom held its breath. Ranger's reaction was immediate. His body stiffened. His ears snapped upward. Then he let out a sharp, explosive bark, loud enough to make Elise jump and Mark flinch. The bark echoed off the courtroom walls like a gunshot. Judge Harlan slammed his hand against the bench. "Enough! What is going on here?" But Ava wasn't startled. She simply slid her hand along Ranger's back and said, in the clearest voice she'd used all morning, "He remembers." Her 3-year-old certainty was jarring, unsettling, almost otherworldly. Remembered what? Remembered when? Remembered who? Everyone in the courtroom realized at the same instant. This wasn't just a child's imagination. This was a child revealing a truth that no one expected, and possibly no one was ready to hear. The tension broke into a wave of anxious murmurs. Ranger barked again, directly at Mark. This time Mark stepped backward. And in that instant, Judge Harlan knew. Something buried was clawing its way to the surface. Something that was about to change everything. The courtroom had gone from tense to stunned silence in less than a heartbeat. Ava's whisper, "He remembers," hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. Every eye was locked on the small child and the German Shepherd Ranger, whose primal intelligence seemed to amplify the room's unease. The deputy at the front of the courtroom took an involuntary step back, hand tightening on Ranger's leash. He had trained dogs for over a decade, seen every kind of erratic behavior a child or adult could exhibit, yet nothing in his career had prepared him for this. Ranger wasn't just reacting, he was responding. Responding to a memory, a person, something only Ava seemed to know. Mark Reynolds sat frozen, sweat beading at his hairline. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the bench. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, whispering words he barely heard. Even Elise, though trembling, took a sharp, audible intake of breath, her eyes widening at the sight of Ranger's unwavering focus. Judge Harlan leaned forward, voice sharp but measured. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, pointing a finger with the authority only decades on the bench could command, "does your daughter know this dog?" Mark's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "No," he said, but his voice cracked. She doesn't know him. His words faltered, replaced by a nervous twitch in his jaw. His gaze flicked to the doorway, then back to Ava and Ranger. Something in the set of his shoulders betrayed him, a tension he could no longer hide. The judge's eyes narrowed, piercing through the layers of pretense. "Are you certain?" he asked, "because this dog's behavior suggests otherwise." Ava, oblivious to the scrutiny, slid off the bench and knelt beside Ranger. She pressed her tiny hands against his fur and whispered again. Ranger leaned into her touch, tail swishing slowly, ears up, eyes sharp. His body was coiled, every muscle taut with attention. This wasn't play. This was recognition. The murmurs in the gallery intensified. Social workers exchanged nervous glances, and a few spectators shifted in their seats, leaning forward as if the next words might break the very fabric of the room. The tension was electric, a current that could ignite at any moment. Ava's voice, small but deliberate, cut through the hum of whispers. "He remembers the bad night," she said. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed down on everyone. The deputy's jaw tightened. Ranger let out a low, warning growl, shifting slightly to position himself between Ava and the adults at the front of the room. Elise gasped audibly, clutching the edge of the bench. Her voice trembled as she whispered, almost to herself, "Oh God, no." Judge Harlan's pen froze mid-note. He had seen emotional breakdowns before, but there was something profoundly different about this moment. The courtroom was no longer a place of procedure. It was a stage where a hidden truth was clawing its way to daylight, and the actors were a 3-year-old, a dog, and 2 terrified adults. The judge's voice regained its composure, though it carried a sharper edge. "Miss Harper," he said, addressing Elise directly, "do you know what your daughter is referring to?" Elise's hands trembled as she gripped her knees. She shook her head, words failing her at first. Then with a shaky breath she said, It was the night we left. I never told anyone." Her voice broke mid-sentence. She looked toward the judge, eyes wide with fear. I thought it was gone." "Gone?" Judge Harlan repeated, leaning forward slightly. "Explain." Elise's voice faltered again, soft but urgent. "Months ago, Mark, we had an argument. It got bad. I took Ava and left. I didn't call the police. No one knew where we were. I thought we were safe." The courtroom was silent except for Ranger's low growl, steady and unnerving. The dog's gaze never left Ava. The deputy's hand tightened on the leash again, instinctively aware that Ranger was far more alert than any trained officer had a right to be. Mark's face paled. His lawyer's voice rose, sharp and defensive. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A toddler and a dog. What relevance does this?" Judge Harlan raised a hand to silence him. "I'll determine relevance," he said, voice firm. He turned toward the deputy. "Explain Ranger's reaction. Has he ever behaved like this in a courtroom?" The deputy's voice was calm but laced with disbelief. "Never, Your Honor. Not even with aggressive individuals. He's responding to her. He's responding to her words, to her presence. I've never seen him act like this." The judge's gaze returned to Ava. She was now kneeling beside Ranger, small fingers stroking his coat, whispering to him as though conveying secrets only he could understand. Her wide brown eyes were unwavering, filled with innocence, yet carrying a depth that seemed impossible for someone so young. And then, almost imperceptibly, Ranger shifted. His posture became rigid. His ears swiveled toward the doorway, his eyes scanning the perimeter. A sudden bark, controlled, purposeful, erupted from him, echoing through the chamber. Everyone jumped, some instinctively ducking, some frozen in place. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows knitted. What did he see?" he asked. Ava tilted her head, lips pressed into a straight line. Her voice, though small, resonated in the courtroom. "The bad room," she said. A hush fell. Every adult in the room registered the words. There was a pause so long it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Elise gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. The deputy's hand tightened on the leash again. Ranger growled, low and steady, eyes fixed on Mark, as though understanding the unspoken truths that Ava was too young to articulate fully. Judge Harlan stood slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice carrying a rare weight, "would you like to explain your daughter's words?" Mark swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His lawyer muttered something under his breath, but Mark didn't hear it. He was staring at Ranger, then Ava, then back at Elise, as if seeing ghosts he had long tried to bury. Finally, he said, voice strained, I don't know what she's talking about. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. No one believed him, not the judge, not the deputy, not Elise, not even the murmuring crowd in the gallery. Ranger barked again, sharper this time, and pressed closer to Ava's side. The dog's behavior was no longer just curious. It was almost protective, almost accusatory. He seemed to say, I know the truth. You cannot hide it. Ava tilted her head, whispering again, he remembers Mommy crying. The words were almost too much to bear. Elise's face turned pale, her body trembling as if she might collapse. Mark's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The judge pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to maintain control over proceedings he realized were quickly slipping beyond conventional courtroom norms. A murmur ran through the spectators, quickly stifled by the judge's gavel, but the tension didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew heavier, thicker, almost palpable. Everyone felt it. Something was about to surface that could not be contained. Judge Harlan leaned forward, voice calm but firm. This court will recess for 10 minutes while we consider the implications of these revelations. No one is to leave. We are not finished here. Ava, ignoring the whispered chatter, nestled closer to Ranger. The dog rested his head against her shoulder, as if confirming a silent pact between them. He growled softly, low in his throat, a warning not just to Mark, but to everyone who thought the past could remain hidden. The judge's eyes lingered on the pair, his expression unreadable. Even with decades of experience, he felt a twinge of unease. Something extraordinary was happening, something that defied explanation, that blurred the lines between innocence and awareness, between human memory and animal instinct. And as the bailiff called the court into recess, Ava looked up at Ranger, her tiny face resolute, her voice almost a whisper only he could hear. Don't let him lie. The room erupted in whispers once more, the tension slicing through the air like a knife. Every adult left with the same thought echoing in their minds. How could a 3-year-old and a dog know what they knew? And why was the truth hiding in plain sight? The courtroom remained eerily silent after the recess was called. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed loud in the heavy tension. Spectators leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away from the scene unfolding before them. A 3-year-old girl, a German shepherd, and 2 adults whose past was unraveling with every heartbeat. Ava, seated on the floor now, rested her small hand on Ranger's broad shoulder. The dog's presence seemed to anchor her in a way no adult could. His head stayed tilted, ears forward, eyes locked on Mark Reynolds like he was silently weighing the man's every move. The deputy stood a few feet away, hands firmly gripping Ranger's leash, though it was clear the dog was making his own decisions. Judge Harlan's gavel banged sharply against the bench. Order in the court. His voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. We are resuming. Miss Harper, please continue. Elise Harper's hands were still trembling. Her eyes were wide, pupils darting nervously from the judge to Mark to Ranger to Ava, as though she were tracking invisible threads connecting them all. She swallowed hard and spoke, voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. There was a night, she began, voice barely above a whisper. Mark and we fought. It got out of control. I had to leave with Ava. I didn't call anyone. I thought we could disappear for a while, just hide, protect her. Her eyes dropped to the floor, tears tracing quiet paths down her cheeks. Ranger let out a low, almost growling exhale, and Ava leaned closer, whispering into his fur as though to reassure him. Mark's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, visibly struggling to form words. His lawyer muttered under his breath, a stream of arguments that were lost before they began. Judge Harlan's voice cut through. "Miss Harper, you're speaking of events no one else knew about. Are you saying that night, the one Ava is referring to, there was someone else involved, or something else witnessed?" Elise shook her head rapidly. "No, no one else saw. I thought it was only between us, only a memory. I thought it was gone." Ava's small voice rose above the adults, unexpectedly firm. "He remembers Mommy crying." The room froze. Elise gasped audibly, clutching her knees. Mark's face drained of color. Ranger's low growl turned sharper, and he inched closer to Ava, almost protectively, as though confirming her words. Judge Harlan stood slowly, the weight of years in his frame, but even his experience couldn't mask the unease that settled over him. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice measured but tinged with steel, "what is your response to your daughter's claim?" Mark's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the bench. I don't know what she's saying," he muttered. His eyes flickered toward the exit, then back to Ava and Ranger. "She's just a kid. She doesn't understand." Ranger barked sharply at him. It wasn't a playful bark. It was a warning. The kind of bark a trained K9 emits when instincts recognize danger, deceit, or a threat to someone under its protection. The sound reverberated across the courtroom, silencing even the whispers in the gallery. Ava's voice rang out, small but chillingly certain. "He remembers the bad room." The courtroom fell into a stunned hush. Every adult present registered the words. They didn't understand what she meant, yet the conviction in her tone, paired with Ranger's tense, coiled posture, made disbelief impossible. The deputy swallowed hard. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "Ranger has never reacted like this to a courtroom before. I don't know why he's so focused on this man or why he's reacting to the child like this. But he's reacting. Something going on." Judge Harlan pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes narrowing. He motioned for everyone to remain calm. "Proceed," he said to Elise, "and tell the court everything you remember, every detail that led to that night." Elise took a shuddering breath, then began. "We argued. It wasn't just a normal fight. He got angry, and I didn't know how far it could go. I grabbed Ava and ran. I went to the neighbor's house, but the phone line was dead. I was terrified. I thought if anyone knew, if anyone saw, he'd—" She broke off, sobbing. Ranger's growl intensified. He stepped closer, almost nudging Elise as though to encourage her to keep speaking. Ava whispered to him, "It's okay, tell him." The deputy's hand tightened around the leash. He was trained, professional, and used to controlling Ranger in chaotic situations, yet he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This wasn't chaos, this was clarity, a truth that only Ava and Ranger seemed to fully comprehend. Mark's head snapped up. "You're lying," he barked, voice rising. "This is nonsense. A 3-year-old and a dog, that's ridiculous." Ranger barked again, sharper, louder, directed at Mark. The bark carried the weight of a verdict, a judgment not rendered by humans but by instinct and memory. Mark flinched, stumbling back in his chair, eyes wide with shock and fear. Ava tilted her head, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "Daddy was loud," she whispered. "Ranger remembers." The words cut deeper than any accusation could. Every eye in the room locked on Mark, noting the subtle tremor in his hands, the pallor of his skin, the tiny beads of sweat forming along his temple. Judge Harlan stood, his gavel raised, the authority of his position palpable. "Mr. Reynolds," he said slowly, deliberately, "do you deny the events your daughter is describing, or are you acknowledging them silently?" Mark opened his mouth, then paused, struggling. His lips trembled and he finally muttered, almost inaudibly, I didn't mean, it wasn't supposed to." Ranger barked one last time, loud and precise. His stance was protective of Ava, accusatory toward Mark, and somehow almost celebratory, as though a hidden truth had finally been named. The sound reverberated across the courtroom, echoing off the walls, leaving a ringing tension that refused to dissipate. The gallery was silent. The attorneys froze, pencils poised, papers untouched. Even the bailiff leaned forward, uncertain how to act. Ava, nestled against Ranger, whispered softly, "Don't let him lie." The words, simple yet loaded, seemed to hang in the air. They carried a weight far beyond her years, a burden of truth and fear that no adult could ignore. Judge Harlan adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing at Mark. He could feel the truth pressing through the room like a tide threatening to sweep everything away. "This court," he said, voice steady, "will not ignore evidence, whether it comes from a child or a trained officer. The behavior of this K-9 is now part of the record. I am ordering the collection of all relevant evidence surrounding the night in question, including any video footage, witness testimony, and reports from the responding officers." The deputy shifted uneasily. "Your Honor, that footage is archived. We'll need permission to retrieve it." "Do it," Harlan said, "immediately." Mark slumped into his chair, his face pale. His hands dropped limply into his lap. He realized the room had turned against him, the very presence of a child and a dog exposing him in a way nothing else could. Elise wiped her tears but didn't move. She simply nodded at the judge, relief washing over her in small, hesitant waves. Ranger's presence continued to ground her, a silent affirmation that some invisible justice had finally been set in motion. Ava looked up at Ranger, her expression calm and resolute despite the chaos around them. "He knows," she whispered, barely audible. "Ranger knows." Ranger's ears twitched. He lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging the truth in her words, his eyes unwavering from Mark. Judge Harlan leaned back, his fingers steepled, considering the ramifications. "This court will reconvene after evidence is collected. Everyone will remain in place. No one leaves. The night's events will be fully investigated." The room remained tense, frozen in a moment that felt suspended between reality and revelation. Every adult present understood. The next steps would uncover truths some had hoped remained buried forever. And a 3-year-old child, with the instinctual intelligence of a dog and the courage of innocence, had become the epicenter of it all. Ava whispered to Ranger once more, "We'll show them." Ranger responded with a soft, confirming growl. The courtroom didn't yet know it, but the real storm was just beginning. And when it hit, nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom had barely regained its composure when the bailiff announced that the requested evidence had arrived. A hush fell over the room as an officer wheeled in a laptop, setting it on the clerk's desk. The screen flickered to life, and the faces of everyone in the gallery reflected the blue glow of anticipation and dread. Judge Harlan adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "We will view this footage here in the presence of all parties. If anyone objects, the court will address it immediately. Otherwise, we proceed." Mark Reynolds, lawyer, opened his mouth to protest, but Mark waved him off. He was pale, silent, eyes fixed on the screen. Something in the pit of his stomach told him that whatever awaited on that small monitor could change everything. Ava sat on the floor next to Ranger, holding onto the dog's fur as if drawing strength from him. The dog's presence was steadying, a quiet, silent reassurance that some truth, long buried, was about to be revealed. The deputy clicked the mouse, and the screen flickered, revealing footage from a routine patrol months ago, the night Elise had fled with Ava. The grainy video showed the quiet suburban street, the dull glow of street lamps reflecting off wet asphalt, the neighborhood in eerie stillness. Then Ranger appeared. Not as he did now, calm and obedient, but as he had been then, tense, alert, every muscle taut, pulling at the leash, nose pressed to the ground. The deputy's voiceover explained, "Ranger was with me. Routine patrol call. Nothing unusual reported. Until..." The footage jumped to a view of the Reynolds garage. Ranger was straining toward the closed door, barking sharply. The officer's struggle to hold him back was evident, his voice tense as he called out commands. "No forced entry," the officer's voice echoed. "No one home." but the camera's microphone picked up something faint, almost imperceptible, a small, distressed cry, a child's cry. The gallery went silent. Even Mark's lawyer froze, pencil hovering mid-note. Mark himself turned ghostly pale, his eyes widening as his jaw went slack. Elise gasped, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Tears welled in her eyes. That's her, she's crying, Ava." The judge leaned forward, expression tight. "That cry, are you certain, officer?" The deputy nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't hear it at the time, but now, replayed slowly, it's unmistakable. It's a child, and Ranger, he was reacting to it." Ranger, sitting next to Ava in the courtroom now, tilted his head as if he recalled that very night. His ears twitched, his body stiffened slightly, a memory surfacing in instinct alone. He let out a low growl, not threatening the adults but marking the seriousness of the revelation. Ava leaned closer to him, whispering softly, "He remembers the bad night." Mark's face crumpled. His hands trembled violently now, sweat forming along his temples. He opened his mouth, and the words that came out were a strangled whisper, barely audible. She wasn't supposed to remember. Elise's voice was raw, trembling as she spoke to the judge. "I never told anyone the details. I thought it was gone. I wanted to protect her, and I didn't want him to get away with what he did." The courtroom collectively shivered. Every eye shifted toward Mark, who had sunk into the bench, his hands pressed to his face. Ranger barked sharply at him, almost accusatory, as though aware of what he had done and unwilling to let it go unnoticed. Judge Harlan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Reynolds," he said slowly, deliberately, "the court is now in possession of evidence suggesting that your daughter's statements and the K-9's reaction are accurate. You may respond." Mark's lips quivered and he let out a strangled sound, neither fully a word nor a sentence. His voice broke when he finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. She was just a baby. I didn't know she would remember." Ranger growled low and deep, a sound that made even the hardened officers flinch. His gaze never left Mark, and Ava clung to him, her small body trembling not with fear, but with a profound sense of knowing. Elise took a shaky step forward. Her voice, though soft, carried into every corner of the room. "Mark, he was crying, she was screaming, I had to leave. I protected her, and I kept her safe, but now the truth is out, and it can't be ignored anymore." The gallery was silent. The whispers had died. Spectators leaned forward, holding their breath, sensing the gravity of what had been revealed. Even the lawyers, typically trained to argue over minutiae, were silent, their usual words caught in the weight of the moment. Judge Harlan cleared his throat, speaking slowly, deliberately. "This court recognizes the extraordinary nature of today's proceedings. A child's testimony combined with trained K-9 behavior and corroborating evidence cannot be dismissed. Therefore, we will proceed to a full investigation of the night in question. Every detail will be scrutinized. Every action will be accounted for." Mark's face contorted with fear, shame, and desperation. He realized, in that instant, that nothing could shield him from the truth any longer. Ranger's unflinching gaze and Ava's calm certainty left him exposed, vulnerable, and cornered. Ava looked up at the judge, still nestled against Ranger, her expression solemn beyond her years. "He remembers Mommy crying," she whispered again, as if affirming the verdict in her own way. Ranger barked once, sharp, decisive, final. It was a sound that carried judgment, acknowledgement, and closure all at once. The judge nodded. "This court will reconvene once additional evidence and witness statements have been reviewed. Mark Reynolds, you are hereby instructed to cooperate fully with law enforcement. Any attempt to conceal or misrepresent the events of that night will result in immediate action." Mark's shoulders sagged. He was silent now, defeated, as though the weight of the room, of the evidence, and of the child's unwavering truth had collapsed him entirely. Elise exhaled slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks, finally allowing herself to feel relief. Ranger nudged her gently and Ava whispered into the dog's ear, "We did it. He can't lie anymore." The gallery began to stir, murmurs growing as the reality of what they had witnessed sank in. It was a courtroom drama unlike any other, a child, a dog, and a truth too heavy to be ignored. Judge Harlan leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "This is far from over," he said, almost to himself. "But today, the first cracks in the facade have appeared, and the truth, as always, will find its way." Ranger sat calmly, ears forward, eyes never leaving Ava. She stroked his fur, small hands steady despite the tension that still hung thick in the room. Together, child and dog, they had done what no one else could, revealed a truth that had been buried, unspoken, but never forgotten. Mark Reynolds, for the first time in months, perhaps years, realized that there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. He slumped in his seat, defeated, as the courtroom prepared for the next phase. The investigation that would bring every hidden moment of that night into the harsh, unflinching light. Ava whispered one last time to Ranger, her tiny voice carrying the weight of certainty. "He knows now. He can't hide." Ranger barked once, low and triumphant, as if acknowledging her words. And the courtroom, stunned and silent, knew in that instant that nothing, not fear, not lies, not time, could ever undo what had just been revealed. The moment the courtroom emptied, the tension didn't dissipate. It merely shifted. Outside the polished wooden doors, a storm of whispered speculation filled the hallway, but inside, Ava and Ranger remained the quiet epicenter of truth. Judge Harlan had adjourned for evidence collection, but the case had already begun to take on a life of its own. The deputy walked slowly beside Ranger, hands still on the leash. "He's remarkable," the officer said softly, almost to himself. "I've trained dogs for 15 years, but I've never seen anything like this. He's not just reacting, he's remembering. He's recognizing a past event." Ava, holding Ranger's fur, looked up at the officer with wide brown eyes. "He knows where it happened," she whispered. The deputy froze. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Ava tugged gently on Ranger's leash, pointing down the hallway. "There, the bad room he remembers. Daddy was there." The deputy's hand tightened instinctively. Ranger's ears twitched, head tilting, and his body tensed. It was as though the dog had already located the place Ava was referring to, a room, a memory, a secret. Meanwhile, back in the courtroom, Judge Harlan sat with Elise and her lawyer. The judge's expression was unreadable, but there was a deep furrow in his brow. "We need a full investigation," he said, voice low but firm. "The video footage confirms some aspects, but there are gaps. Witnesses need to be interviewed. The scene, the place where this all began, must be secured and examined." Elise nodded, holding back tears. I can take you there," she said. Her voice was tight, trembling. "I've been afraid to go back, but I know it's the only way to prove she's telling the truth." Judge Harlan's eyes softened just slightly. "We'll take precautions. Law enforcement will accompany you, and we'll ensure your daughter and that K9 are protected. This is delicate, but it's necessary." By mid-afternoon, the small convoy of officers, Judge Harlan's bailiff, Elise, Ava, and Ranger arrived at a quiet suburban street. The neighborhood was nearly empty, and the late sun cast long shadows across cracked sidewalks. The house they approached looked ordinary at first glance, a two-story structure with faded siding and a creaking front porch. But to those who knew what had happened inside, it radiated a history of secrets, fear, and pain. Ranger's body stiffened the instant they stepped onto the property. He sniffed the air, tail low, eyes scanning every corner. Ava clung to his fur, whispering, "This is it. He remembers everything." The deputy nodded, voice tight. "We'll go slow. Let's secure the house before anyone enters." Mark Reynolds, watching from a distance under surveillance, had been forced to surrender his location. He knew the investigation was closing in, but seeing Ava and Ranger together, approaching the house that contained his secrets, made his stomach churn with dread. Every instinct screamed that the past could no longer be hidden. Inside the house, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the faint scent of old furniture. Ranger immediately led the way, nose pressed to the floor, moving with precision as though guided by memory. Ava followed, small hands brushing over his broad back. Then they reached the door, the one Elise had called the bad room. Ranger growled softly, ears forward, standing just inside the doorway. Ava peeked around his massive frame and whispered, "There." The room was small, sparsely furnished. The faded wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the carpet was worn and threadbare. But even in its simplicity, it radiated the energy of a night no one wanted to remember. Ranger moved closer to a corner, sniffing deliberately. He barked once, sharply, then backed up, alerting the officers to something hidden under the bed. One deputy knelt carefully, tugging at a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. When it was revealed, everyone in the room gasped. It was a child's toy, small, frayed, a token Ava had lost months ago during the chaos of that night. Ava's eyes filled with recognition. "Mine," she said, grabbing it. Ranger nuzzled her hand in approval, tail wagging slowly. Judge Harlan, standing silently in the doorway, observed everything with an analytical eye. "This confirms a timeline. The presence of this object aligns with her statements. We are now closer to establishing what occurred that night." Ranger didn't relax. Instead, he moved to the center of the room, ears forward, growling low. His body was coiled, sensing something still hidden. He sniffed along the walls, then stopped at a small vent near the floor. He pawed at it, whining softly. The deputy opened it, revealing a hidden envelope tucked behind the vent panel. Inside were photographs, showing Elise and Ava on the night they had fled. But there was also a note, a hastily scribbled warning from a neighbor who had witnessed part of the night's events. The note detailed Mark's anger, the arguments, and the moments when Elise had feared for Ava's safety. Elise's hands trembled as she read it. This proves it," she whispered. "He tried to hide everything, but now it's all here." Ranger barked once, low and commanding, as if affirming her words. Ava hugged him tightly. "He remembers," she said again. Outside, Mark's lawyer whispered over the phone, panic clear in his voice. "He's losing control. The dog, the child, the evidence, it's all against him." Mark sat slumped in a chair in a surveillance van nearby, hands pressed over his face. His breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. Every instinct told him the walls were closing in. Every memory he had tried to bury was being unearthed by a 3-year-old child and a German shepherd. The deputy beside Ranger glanced down at the dog. "He's incredible," the officer murmured. "I've never seen a dog act with this level of understanding. He's not just a K9, he's a witness in his own right." Ava stroked Ranger's fur, whispering softly, "We'll show them everything. Daddy can't hide it anymore." The tension outside the house mirrored the storm inside Mark's mind. He realized fully that the truth could no longer be denied, concealed, or escaped. Ranger and Ava were unstoppable forces, carrying a memory no human could suppress. Judge Harlan, observing via live feed from the courthouse, noted every detail. This investigation wasn't just about evidence. It was about instinct, memory, and the unshakable certainty of a child who had been brave enough to speak the truth. And the storm was only beginning. Because the night's secrets, now exposed, would force Mark to confront not only what had happened, but the consequences he had long tried to avoid. And in that confrontation, the courtroom, the city, and everyone involved would be changed forever. Ava whispered one final time to Ranger, small but determined, "We're ready. Let's show them everything." Ranger barked once, low, confident, and resolute. The investigation had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back. The courtroom buzzed with tension when the investigation's results were delivered. Judge Harlan called the session to order, but no one really needed it. The air itself seemed charged with expectation. Every eye was on Ava, small and solemn, sitting next to Ranger, who had become more than a dog in this case. He was a silent guardian, an unflinching witness to the truth. Mark Reynolds sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, hands gripping the edge as if it could anchor him against the storm bearing down. His lawyer whispered frantically, but Mark barely heard him. The weight of exposure had pressed down on him like a vice, and now, with the evidence collected from the bad room, he understood there was no escaping the consequences. Judge Harlan's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and commanding. "We will now proceed with a review of the evidence collected from the residence in question. All parties, please remain seated." The screen flickered to life. The grainy surveillance footage rolled first, the same images seen during Part 4, but now complemented with detailed snapshots of the room's interior. The frayed toy Ava had recognized, the hidden envelope, and the photographs confirming Elise's account. A hush fell over the courtroom. The visuals told a story that words alone could not: the fear, the flight, and the night of terror that no one had been able to confront until now. Elise swallowed hard. This is everything," she whispered to Judge Harlan, her hands trembling. "The child she remembers, and he remembers too." Her gaze shifted toward Ranger, who sat with head high, alert and watchful, ears twitching at every sound. Judge Harlan's eyes narrowed, scanning Mark with a cold precision. "Mr. Reynolds, do you recognize the items, the photos, and the scene?" Mark's hands twitched, and he shook his head, voice barely audible. No, it's not what it looks like." The deputy beside Ranger interjected. "Your Honor, if I may, Ranger's behavior when we arrived at the residence clearly indicates he recognized specific locations and objects tied to the child's experience. His reactions were intentional and precise. He led us directly to these items without hesitation." Ranger's growl was low, almost a warning. He pressed closer to Ava, ears forward, tail coiled tightly, alert to the slightest movement. Ava whispered into his fur, small but certain, "They have to know." The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We are now at a point where a child's testimony, corroborated by physical evidence and a trained K-9's behavior, must be considered credible. Mr. Reynolds, this court has a simple question. Did the events described by your daughter occur as stated?" Mark's lips quivered. His hands shook visibly. His eyes darted from Ranger to Ava to the judge. The weight of inevitability pressed down on him, and he could no longer maintain the flimsy shield of denial. "It had happened," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "But I didn't mean I didn't know she would remember." Ranger barked sharply, a single accusatory bark that echoed across the courtroom. The sound was undeniable, precise, intentional, and almost punitive. Every adult in the room flinched. Mark recoiled as if struck, pale and broken. Ava's small voice rang out, unwavering. "He remembers Mommy crying." The words cut through the air like a knife. Elise gasped, tears sliding down her cheeks. Even Judge Harlan's lips pressed into a thin line. This was no longer a case of conflicting stories. It was an undeniable confrontation with the truth, and the room felt the weight of it collectively. Mark's hands dropped to his lap. I didn't know she would remember," he repeated, voice cracking. His eyes glistened with fear and shame, a reflection of the guilt he had spent months trying to bury. The judge's voice was steady but sharp. "Mr. Reynolds, the court recognizes your admission, but understand this. A child's testimony, physical evidence, and the behavior of a trained K-9 cannot be dismissed. The court will now review all witness statements collected during the investigation, and your full cooperation is required." The courtroom technician brought up a series of interviews conducted with neighbors and officers who had responded to calls that night. Each statement painted a consistent picture: Mark's escalating anger, Elise's protective flight, and the presence of the child in distress. Ava leaned into Ranger, small hands stroking his fur. "He can't hide anymore," she whispered. Ranger responded with a low growl, almost in agreement. The dog's eyes never left Mark, a silent enforcer of the truth. One officer stepped forward to give a live statement. "Your Honor, upon arrival, we found signs of forced entry and evidence of a child fleeing in distress. The items recovered, along with the behavior of K9 Ranger, strongly suggest that the child experienced trauma consistent with her statements." Mark's head sank lower. His face was pale, his body trembling. For the first time, he felt the weight of accountability, the kind that no denial could dissolve. Judge Harlan's gaze bore into him. "Mr. Reynolds, you have heard the statements, seen the evidence, and witnessed the behavior of your daughter and this K9. Is there any attempt at misrepresentation you wish to make?" Mark's mouth opened, but no words came. His lawyer shook his head helplessly, knowing there was nothing left to argue. Ava, her voice small but unyielding, whispered once more to Ranger, "Don't let him lie." Ranger barked sharply again, a sound that resonated like a verdict in itself. The court felt it. Every adult felt it. This was no longer about evidence or testimony alone. It was about recognition, memory, and undeniable truth. Elise wiped her tears but held herself upright. "Judge, I've kept her safe all this time, but now the truth has to be seen. I can't protect him from consequences anymore. He has to answer for what he did." The gallery murmured softly, the spectators sensing the profound moment unfolding before them. A child, a dog, and the assembled evidence had exposed a truth that no adult could suppress. Judge Harlan took a deep breath. This court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances presented today. The child's statements, supported by physical evidence and the behavior of the trained K9, are credible and compelling. Mr. Reynolds, the court will take all necessary steps to ensure justice is served. Ranger's ears flicked toward Ava, his presence calm but unyielding. She leaned against him, whispering, "We did it. They know now." Mark sat slumped in his chair, pale and trembling, realizing fully that the game was over. He had tried to hide the truth, to manipulate memory, to escape accountability, but a 3-year-old child and a dog had stripped it all away. Judge Harlan's gavel hit the desk with finality. "This session is adjourned until further evidence and witness testimony are fully reviewed. Be advised, the court will not tolerate any obstruction or concealment. The truth has begun to emerge, and it will continue to do so, with or without your cooperation." As the courtroom emptied, Ava hugged Ranger tightly. "We made him tell the truth," she whispered. The dog rested his head gently against hers, tail still coiled and alert, as though silently confirming her words. Outside, Mark remained seated, staring blankly at the floor. The weight of exposure and accountability pressed down, suffocating him. The realization had set in. The truth could no longer be denied. And in that quiet moment, the world seemed to pause, recognizing a simple yet extraordinary fact. A child and a dog together had shattered lies, confronted fear, and brought hidden truths into the light. The stage was set for what would come next, the legal reckoning, the final confrontation, and the ultimate resolution that would leave the courtroom and everyone involved forever changed. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with anticipation, the scent of polished wood mingling with the unspoken tension of those who had witnessed truth being unveiled. Ava sat close to Ranger, her tiny hands clutching his fur like a shield, a source of courage she didn't yet fully understand. The dog's presence was commanding, alert, and unwavering, a living testament that the night's events could no longer be denied. Judge Harlan entered, his expression tight, deliberate, as he surveyed the room. Lawyers shifted nervously, reporters scribbled furiously, and the gallery seemed to lean forward collectively, drawn into the drama like moths to a flame. "Order in the court," Judge Harlan's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs. "We are here to hear the full testimony and review all evidence. Mr. Reynolds, you are required to be present and fully cooperative. Any deviation will be addressed immediately." Mark Reynolds' hands were trembling as he rose. His lawyer gave a barely perceptible nod, but it did nothing to calm him. The weight of inevitability had pressed upon him with crushing force, and now, with the investigation's findings fully compiled, he faced not just exposure but reckoning. Elise Harper sat upright, eyes brimming with resolve. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady, "I want everything on the record, no detail hidden. The truth has to be complete, for Ava." Judge Harlan nodded, a subtle acknowledgement that the day's proceedings were extraordinary. "Proceed," he said. "We will hear every account, review every piece of evidence, and ensure the record reflects the reality of that night." The first witness called was the responding officer from the night Elise and Ava fled. His testimony was meticulous, precise, every detail corroborating Elise's account. "The child was in distress," he explained. "The mother fled in fear. Signs of struggle were evident, and the K-9 ranger's behavior was highly unusual. He pinpointed the room where the child was most at risk." Ranger sat at Ava's side, ears forward, tail coiled in alert tension. His eyes were fixed on Mark, unwavering, unblinking. Ava whispered, "He remembers, Daddy." Mark's face turned pale. His jaw tightened, but no words came. His lawyer attempted a quiet interjection, but Judge Harlan raised a hand. "Silence," he commanded. "This court will hear no interference. The truth is to be presented without obstruction." Next, the neighbor who had witnessed the night was called. Their statement detailed Mark's escalating anger, Elise's desperate escape, and the small cries of Ava that had pierced the quiet of the neighborhood. The photos found behind the vent were presented as evidence, small, intimate moments frozen in time, undeniable. The gallery was silent. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, had a weight that was inescapable. The child's fear, the mother's courage, and the dog's instincts combined to create a narrative impossible to refute. Judge Harlan finally turned his gaze toward Mark. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, voice tight with authority, "you have seen the evidence, heard the testimonies, and observed the behavior of this trained K-9. Is there any attempt to refute what has been presented?" Mark's lips trembled. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't know she would." His voice faltered, breaking under the weight of shame and guilt. Ranger growled, low and decisive, a sound that resonated through the courtroom. It was a sound of judgment, of acknowledgement, and of consequence. Ava, small but unwavering, whispered, "He can't lie anymore." The climax of the day came when Judge Harlan allowed Ava to speak. A small chair was brought forward, and she climbed onto it with Ranger sitting beside her, massive and steady. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "Tell them," Elise whispered softly, brushing Ava's hair back. Ava looked around the room, eyes steady, and spoke clearly. "Daddy, you were loud. Mommy cried. I was scared. Ranger knows. He remembers." The courtroom gasped. Even seasoned officers blinked, taken aback by the clarity of a 3-year-old's words. Ranger's ears twitched, and he barked once, sharp, commanding, and definitive. It was as if he were confirming every word, every memory, every fear Ava had carried. Mark's head dropped into his hands. He had no defense left, no shield. Every lie, every denial had been stripped away by a child and a dog. He was exposed, vulnerable, and fully accountable. Judge Harlan leaned forward, voice low but unwavering. "This court acknowledges the bravery of the child, the accuracy of the evidence, and the extraordinary role of the K-9. Mr. Reynolds, the time for denial is over. The truth has been revealed, and now you will face the consequences of your actions." Mark didn't respond. He could not. The weight of reality, guilt, and shame pressed down on him like an immovable force. His lawyer's hand hovered over his shoulder, powerless to intervene. Ava stroked Ranger's fur gently. "He knows now," she whispered. Ranger's tail gave a slow, deliberate wag, a silent affirmation of victory and protection. The courtroom murmured softly, the tension giving way to a shared recognition. Justice, long delayed, was finally being realized. Judge Harlan's gavel struck the bench with authority. This session is adjourned. A full sentencing will follow based on the evidence and testimonies provided. Mark Reynolds, you are hereby placed on notice. The truth has emerged. Your accountability is unavoidable. Outside the courthouse, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the steps. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing, but no one approached Ava. She and Ranger walked slowly, Elise at her side, the dog's massive presence protective, almost ceremonial. Ranger's ears twitched as he scanned the surroundings, alert to every movement. Ava whispered to him softly, "We did it. He can't hide it anymore." Elise's hand rested lightly on Ava's shoulder. "You were brave," she said, voice trembling. "More than anyone could imagine. You spoke the truth when no one else could." The deputy nodded, a quiet smile on his face. "That dog, that child, they're remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. Ranger didn't just protect her, he made sure the truth was undeniable." Mark Reynolds, seated in the holding area, could only watch as the world outside moved on. The walls of deception had crumbled. The child's courage and the dog's instincts had shattered the facade. And the reckoning, inevitable, undeniable, had begun. Ava looked up at Ranger, eyes shining. "He knows now," she repeated, her voice small but full of certainty. Ranger nuzzled her gently in return. And as the courthouse doors closed behind them, one thing was clear. The truth had emerged. Justice, long delayed, was finally within reach. But the story was not over. The consequences of that night, the emotional scars and the healing that would follow were still to come. And in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, the image of a small child, fearless and determined, standing beside a K9 who remembered everything, would never be forgotten. The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. A tension hung in the air like the thick fog that rolled in over the city streets outside. Today was not just another hearing. It was the final chapter of months of unearthing hidden truths, of confronting fear, and of seeing justice inch closer, step by deliberate step. Ava sat beside Ranger, her small hand resting on his fur. The dog was calm but alert, muscles coiled beneath his sleek coat, his eyes following every movement in the courtroom. He had become more than a protector. He was a witness, a guardian, a living testament to the truth of that night. Elise Harper sat behind them, her hands intertwined in her lap, trying to steady herself. She glanced down at Ava and Ranger and smiled, a small, proud smile that spoke volumes. "You've been so brave," she whispered. Ava simply nodded, her attention fixed on the proceedings, her eyes unflinching. Judge Harlan entered, his presence commanding immediate silence. "We are here for the final sentencing of Mark Reynolds," he said. After reviewing all evidence, witness statements, and the extraordinary testimony provided, the court is prepared to issue its ruling. Mark Reynolds sat at the defense table, pale, shoulders slumped. His lawyer muttered something, but Mark didn't respond. The weight of accountability had pressed down fully, and he had no defenses left. The K9's growls, Ava's unwavering testimony, and the documented evidence had stripped away every layer of denial. The prosecutor stood, voice firm. "Your Honor, this case is unlike any I have ever encountered. A child's testimony, corroborated by both physical evidence and a trained K9's behavior, leaves no doubt as to the events of that night. The defendant's actions endangered a child, caused immeasurable trauma, and demonstrate a pattern of controlling and abusive behavior. We ask the court to consider the full weight of these factors in its sentencing." The gallery was silent, every ear straining, every eye fixed on the judge. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Every person in the room seemed to understand that today was a turning point, not just legally, but morally, emotionally, and symbolically. Judge Harlan adjusted his glasses, his gaze sweeping over Mark before settling on Ava and Elise. "This court has reviewed extensive evidence. The child's courage, the mother's steadfast protection, and the actions of the K-9, extraordinary in their precision and clarity, have made the truth irrefutable. Mr. Reynolds, your actions have caused severe emotional harm and violated the trust and safety of your child. This court will now impose its sentence, reflecting both the severity of your actions and the imperative of accountability. Mark's hands trembled. His head drooped as if trying to disappear beneath the weight of the verdict. The room held its collective breath. Judge Harlan's gavel struck the bench, firm, echoing through the cavernous courtroom. Mark Reynolds is hereby sentenced to a term of incarceration, the details of which reflect the severity of the harm caused. You are also required to undergo mandated counseling and supervised rehabilitation. This court acknowledges the extraordinary bravery of Elise Harper and her daughter, Ava, as well as the remarkable service of the K-9, Ranger, whose instincts and courage were instrumental in revealing the truth. A hush fell over the room. For the first time, Mark looked up, eyes meeting Ava's. For a moment, it was as if he were seeing not a frightened child, but an unflinching force of truth. He had tried to hide, to deny, to control, but none of it mattered anymore. The consequences were real, undeniable, and inescapable. Ava reached out and rested her hand on Ranger's head. "We did it," she whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. Ranger nudged her gently, his tail wagging slowly, a silent affirmation of victory and protection. Elise exhaled, relief washing over her. She looked down at Ava and smiled through tears. "We're free now," she said. "We can finally move forward." Outside the courthouse, the sun was breaking through the clouds. It wasn't just daylight, it was a metaphor, a literal and figurative lifting of the shadows that had hung over their lives for so long. Reporters snapped photographs, but no one dared approach Ava. She was small, but her presence was monumental, and the crowd instinctively gave space to the child and her dog. Ranger walked calmly beside her, ears twitching at every sound, eyes alert but composed. He had done more than protect. He had remembered, revealed, and ensured justice. To Ava, he was not just a dog, he was a hero. Elise knelt beside her daughter, hugging her tightly. "You were so brave," she whispered. "I know it wasn't easy, but you showed courage that changed everything." Ava hugged Ranger with both hands, looking up at Elise. "He remembers everything, Mommy," she said. "He won't let anyone hide the truth." The deputy who had worked with Ranger smiled as he watched them leave the courthouse. "I've seen a lot of things in my career," he said to the officer beside him, voice low, "but nothing like this. That dog and that child, they brought justice in a way no court ever could have alone." Mark Reynolds was led away in handcuffs, his expression a mix of disbelief, shame, and fear. He understood fully now that the consequences of his actions could not be avoided, that the truth was irreversible. Elise and Ava walked away from the courthouse steps, Ranger at their side. For the first time in months, there was no fear in their movements, no tension coiling their shoulders. They had faced the storm, endured the chaos, and emerged victorious. Ava looked up at Ranger, her small voice firm. "We made him tell the truth. No one can lie anymore." Ranger barked softly, a sound of agreement, loyalty, and finality. Elise reached down, hugging both her daughter and the dog. "You're both heroes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "And now we can finally start healing." The city around them moved on, oblivious to the quiet courage that had reshaped one family's fate. But for Elise, Ava, and Ranger, the world had shifted irrevocably. Truth had prevailed, fear had been confronted, and justice, long delayed, had finally been realized. As they disappeared down the street, Ava clinging to Ranger, Elise holding her hand tightly, there was a sense of closure that was almost cinematic in its clarity. The story that had begun with fear and secrecy ended with courage, loyalty, and undeniable truth. Judge Harlan returned to his chambers, gavel in hand, reflecting on the extraordinary proceedings. The courtroom had witnessed something rare, the unassailable power of instinct, memory, and bravery. A child and a dog had rewritten the narrative, exposing a darkness that could not remain hidden. And for Ava, Ranger, and Elise, life would never be the same, not because of the fear they endured, but because of the courage they had shown, the truth they had revealed, and the justice they had achieved. The sun dipped lower, painting the streets gold, and in that light a child and her dog walked forward, unafraid, unstoppable, and victorious. The story, once shadowed by fear and lies, ended not in darkness, but in the brilliance of truth, love, and unwavering courage.